Welcome to a special edition of Ed's Not Dead. I'm Robbie Dodd. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Mr. C.H. Siddons. Hey, Mr. Siddons.
Hello. Welcome to the Mailbag.
Happy holidays. Happy New Year.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. And, of course, Mr. Peter Crable. Mr. Crabes, welcome back.
Yeah, excited for this new segment here.
Welcome to the Bro Pod.
As Mr. Siddons alluded to, this is a special episode of Ed's Not Dead, which is brought to you by Pulp Education, a full-service educational media company specializing in leadership, instruction, and 21st century school reform. So Mr. Siddons has been soliciting questions for the three of us. It is a new Ed's Not Dead special, the Ed's Not Dead Mailbag. And so we're excited. We got some good questions, right? Some of them are a little bit rigorous, a little challenging.
Yeah. Originally, I thought he was just going to read us the questions and then we'd answer them off the cuff, because I thought they'd be like, "What's your favorite color?" But then he sent one. I was like, "Oh, okay." I need to read that beforehand.
That's why in the group text 2 hours ago, I said, "Are we going to see the questions?" I sense that they.
I thought you'd all be into like a little bit of risk taking.
Yeah, I was, but the questions are hard.
They're so hard.
All right,
are these multiple choice?
Thank you to our listeners for sending these via Twitter and other ways. Right? You did you get most of them on Twitter, Mr.
It's Twitter,
Siddons?
LinkedIn, Facebook.
Okay.
I put out a Google form. I got a whole bootload. So.
You put out a Google form.
I did. I tried to capture many different,
like a true millennial. I'm going to send out a Google form to catch.
Do a Survey Monkey, Casey.
I'm going to do a Survey Monkey.
That would be my lane there.
No, you do it on Microsoft Word.
I would. You know what? I don't say PowerPoint anymore. I've broken myself with that. I do say slideshow.
All right. You know what I really love is when people call it a slide deck.
I've never said slide deck.
It's a thing that people use. I'm going to put the slide deck into the chat.
I haven't graduated to that quite yet.
That's too sleazy. Wait, did I say sleazy?
You said sleazy. You better watch.
I'm not sure why.
Where,
but okay.
I have no idea where that word came from. I apologize. I might have been thinking of something else. Anyway, but before we get into the mailbag, fellas, two notable passings that I have to bring up. I think they'll both be interesting to you. One of each will probably be more interesting. Mr. Crable, any thoughts on the passing of Hall of Famer John Madden?
Yeah, in some ways, I mean, he'd been out of the public eye for so long that it wasn't like somebody that, I mean, as much as like you feel like a connection with a commentator, whatever that means. I mean, he'd been gone. I couldn't even tell you when the last game he did 20 years ago, maybe something like that.
2008 or 9.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
But I do have a lot of childhood memories for sure of watching games and watching Washington then Redskins games and all that. So it's a shame and definitely an icon in the sports world.
Definitely an icon. I feel like his influence was kind of paralleled my life. And I was curious for your generation, Mr. Siddons, he captured a whole nother generation through Madden, through the video game. And I'm not sure you played Madden, but you are a millennial video game player.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We played Madden growing up. I was never good at it. So I played NFL Blitz.
Was that on Sega or was that on
NFL Blitz was like people who couldn't handle like the intricacies of like actual Madden, and you could do like crazy things like magical tricks and stuff like that really not really possible, but it was fun.
You do yourself a favor and go watch NFL films on the 1976 Raiders team.
The Raiders.
Yeah, it's a Lawrence Fishburne is the narrator, and it is really well done. All right, Mr. Siddons, question for you. Thoughts on the passing of the late great Senator Harry Reid?
Oh man. So I read an obituary from him from Nevada, from a Nevada newspaper just yesterday. And I was like struck by where he came from. I mean, he came from just like abject poverty.
Searchlight, Nevada.
And I mean, just a I mean, whether you agreed with his policies or not, I mean, he was a force to be reckoned with. And when you look back at how contentious Obamacare was, it makes, today's political fights look like nothing really, because it was a hard fight right up to the very end there.
And his achievement, which I had forgotten, was Christmas Eve 60 out of 60.
Yep.
Which may never be done again.
Never.
Based on the way politics are now, right?
It's wild. 60. They had what was the guy from Florida, senator from Florida, who was going to be signed on, and they had him in separate rooms. Two senators who were on the fence. It's fascinating, the stuff that comes out and how they deal with that, or how they dealt with it, at least at the time.
I think the three of us were together at a middle school when Judge Roberts came out with the ACA decision, right? Supreme Court, weren't we? That was 2012.
2012. We got the CNN alert. I remember forget it.
And we were together in the conference room. It's the summertime. Yeah,
that's right.
All right. Well, I thought I would mention the passing of those two notable figures. All right, let's get into the mailbag. You are first up, Mr. Siddons.
All right, Robbie, this one's for you. It's specifically addressed to you. I don't know which high school student this is, but maybe we need to find out. They didn't leave their name, but they said, why do you think it's important for students to have to take courses like science, English, etc. as requirements? And why can't students just take courses that they want to take throughout their time in school?
Well, thank you for that question. That is a question that, honestly, I don't think I've ever really put much thought into, especially since I am not a dyed-in-the-wool high school educator. I went to high school, never taught in one, never really worked in one until I became the principal of one. So I think that there's some agreement probably about the importance of some learning that is timeless, quantitative learning in math and science. I think has a lot of importance for how the human brain works and how people think. And then I think being able to read, write, and speak are also critical, and I think they have a lot to do with how one makes their way in the world. So I think English, math, science, history are all important because I think they make your brain grow bigger. Not that pursuing subjects of interest or electives, whether it's the arts, physical education, engineering, you name it, all of those things make you smarter also. But I think there are some, going back to the days of probably before the Greeks, there are agreements about what is important for humans to learn about.
Yeah. I think
so I'll defer to Aristotle.
I like that. That's good. That's good.
Go to Aristotle. He wrote very persuasively about it.
I guess there's an argument to be made that that you can garner student interest that they might not know they have.
Yeah, I think so. I think that too. And I think each subject, if you look at it from a disciplinary perspective, makes you think in different ways. And so I think that kind of disciplinary approach to thinking is important.
Yeah.
And I think part of it too, we had a discussion a year ago, maybe, on the purpose of school, and kind of fourth and maybe fifth, reasons for school. And one of those reasons was creating good citizens. And I kind of go back and forth on this one where, at times I definitely think that students should be able to drop, fill in the blank that they no longer have any interest in. But, the hallmark of a liberal arts education is a well-rounded and well-educated individual in many different areas who's able to contribute to society in general.
Right. You
don't have a bunch of super siloed people that are completely ignorant of other ideas, subjects, anything like that. So that's kind of what I feel like too.
Do I think our subjects are too siloed? Yes. You guys know I'm a fan of interdisciplinary learning. Once upon a time, I sicked Mr. Crable on that. as well as you, Mr. Siddons. I did
That's
that
right.
to both of you. I did that to both of you in different ways. So I think that's another way. I mean, I do wish our disciplines were more related to one another for the sake of learning. I would just answer. I would also say to our question asker, our inquirer, it's funny, Crabes, I never even thought for a second about making people better citizens. I've never really viewed school that way.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Dodd. This next one is for Mr. Krabs, and it's from Don on Twitter. It looks like he's from Seattle. He says, hi,
I'm from Seattle.
Don. I'm a new somewhat administrator. I don't know what that means in a middle school. What strategies do you have for how to help my teacher leaders become better? And he was talking about some of his department chairs.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Don from Seattle. I appreciate it. So I think it's going to sound kind of cheesy, but, I think listening is probably the best and biggest skill in terms of developing any sort of teacher leaders, department chairs or not. And part and parcel with that is asking questions and asking difficult questions. So one like guiding principle that I go back on, I got from the venerable Dr. Dodd many years ago when I was department chair working for him, and he described department heads is basically being mini principals and mini principalships. And really, I think telling people that empowers them to feel like they make a difference, like they have autonomy, to feel like they have lots of influence. I even tell a lot of department leaders that I work with that oftentimes I feel like I had more influence over what happened in classrooms as a department head than I do as an administrator. You're just closer to the work, you're closer to the kids, you're closer to the planning, you're closer to everything. So I think going back to what I said before about asking questions and then listening is really asking like, what is their vision for their department or their team? What do they want to have happen? If they could wave a magic wand and make something happen tomorrow, what would it be? Because a lot of times they're like, well, what's your vision, for your department? And that's, I don't know. Some people may have a vision, but sometimes you just got to ask the right question where they're telling you what their vision is and what they foresee for their department without actually asking that,
Right.
That's kind of like the magic wand question. And once they tell you what that is, then you say, okay, well, let's start working backwards. Now we know what we're working towards. Let's put together a plan. Let's put together professional development. Let's put together how often you're going to go into classrooms. What is planning going to look like? What do the planning documents look like? And going back from there. And I think the other last thing I'll say is I have a way that I want things done, and I have a way that makes sense to me. But taking my way of doing things and telling somebody this is how you do the job, unless they have the exact same like brain functionality as you, then it's not going to work.
Right.
So you need to be able to accept that their way of doing things may be different than your way of doing things. And as long as in the end it's equally effective and comes out, that's fine. And that can be hard to do, certainly as an administrator, when you're like, oh, just do this or just do this. And it can be difficult to sit back and just kind of watch them go through the process and even, sometimes make mistakes. But if you're really invested in someone, you stick with them, you keep asking them those questions, you keep letting them work through their process and the things that they want to achieve so that you get to the end result eventually.
How do you view, like, I'm sure you have folks that you've worked with in the past where they're focused on the operational aspect rather than the teacher coaching aspect. How do you approach that?
I mean,
does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same sort of thing with teachers and students. It's like you're not a computer who just spits out information. Teaching's a people business, and leading teachers is also a people business. And I think that's something I speaking for myself personally, I really didn't know 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I thought it was definitely all about like what you knew, but it's really, it's like an HR job in terms of like people dynamics, personalities, conflicts, things that go well together, things that don't go well. It's all about managing personalities and putting people in the right positions to be successful. So I think just knowing that it's a people business and that you always come back to that this is, you're coaching people, not ideas, not spreadsheets, not flowcharts, just kind of always coming back to that.
Right.
That's why I was so fascinated, Mr. Craves, about John Madden in that 1976 NFL Films piece said exactly what you just said. With those Raiders teams, he allowed his players to have personalities. He didn't dictate that they had to stick to the game plan, but they could play the way they wanted to play. They could act the way they wanted to act. And that he also didn't treat every player the same way. The one thing I was going to ask you that I think is tricky, department chairs, resource teachers, whatever you want to call them, are often caught between the classroom and the principal or the administrator. And at times, they get the position because they were the best teacher in the department. But they still, they have to coach, they have to lead people that are often their friends, their colleagues. How do you help department leaders kind of thread the needle interpersonally, relationally with that?
I think one thing that I strive for, and I hope that I do, I feel like I do it a lot, probably not 100% of the time, but is to always treat people with humanity and to tell the people that lead others to do so as well. You know, I'm not one to degrade people. I'm not one to make people feel bad about themselves, to make them feel less than. I just don't think that that's a way to get the best out of people. And so I think for when you're leading teachers, that you, and when you're coaching people who are leading teachers, you know, you really give them the space and say, you know, you may have some difficult conversations and it's okay. You can still treat people respectfully. You can still treat people with dignity, in the same, like, I'm listening to you as you're telling me whatever it is, you know, that you like or don't like. You can still do that to people, in terms of, like, this needs, you know, work on this. We need to work on that, and listen to what they have to say about it, because sometimes you're right and sometimes you're not right. A lot of times, you know, you have great ideas and they work out well, and sometimes you have great ideas and they don't. And so giving people that same sort of freedom, but, you know, telling them to expect at times discomfort, and it's just part of it. I don't particularly love discomfort, and I don't particularly love conflict. You know,
No.
We actually, it's the E word for Mr. Craig. It's emoting. That's what we do.
Emoting.
No, but that's why you're good at it. That's why you're good at it, Mr. Craig, though, because you don't. You know, I think some leaders would immediately kind of go to that emotional, interpersonal entry point. I think your dispassion sometimes is a help, because you don't really get caught up. You can help someone not be overly caught up in that, stay in that space.
Yeah.
And that's the space they go to when somebody they've worked with for 5 years who now won't do what they want them to do. And it's a very complex thing, and they respond personally. They take things personally. I think you're the perfect person to kind of move them away from that spot. All right, ready, Mr. Sids.
Yes.
Speaking of teacher specialists, you're the teacher specialist on the pod. So are you ready for a question from Elena from California?
Let's hear it.
All right. Next year, Elena will be working part of her day with many new teachers who are new to the craft, but are career changers. What kind of advice do you have for her to best support these folks as they start out?
That's a tough one. I think I love hearing that people are changing careers to teaching. First of all, I think it's awesome. I think that a lot of people realize that they're not getting a lot of joy out of their work, and they think that, and they hope that teaching could be that career. And I always found it that way. I get a lot of joy out of teaching. And I think the toughest part is the realizing the amount of stuff that you have to do on any given day, and kind of compartmentalizing that and planning far out. The folks I've worked with who are successful in their career change, being a career changer, I found it very helpful to kind of be a sounding board as we start out, and being there and listening to their concerns, and seeing that, you know, schools aren't always the most well-run organizations. So if they're coming from like a corporation that runs really smoothly or whatever, maybe that's not what you should be expecting. So I don't mean to set the bar low, but at least being ready for that. The second thing is sometimes career changers come in with established families, and they have ways in which they raise their kids, and they have an idea of how their kids should act. And when you have 30 middle schoolers in one classroom, that doesn't always work that way. So I think one of the things that I found to be very successful is because a lot of those career changing tracks, they kind of speed through a lot of the courses you take, especially things like classroom management. So one of the things that I've found was helpful for folks is having a classroom management plan. And I actually helped a couple teachers. I devised it a couple years ago where we charted out all the things that you have to think about or you should think about. And we went through bit by bit, like what's important to you? What kind of things do you think kids need to be ready for based on the level of whether it was high school or middle school, and just being planned in advance to get ready for some of the things that might be coming their way in the next couple of weeks.
And I think one thing I'd like to add too that can be especially difficult, I think, for career changers is even if you're like mid-career, you might have come from a different industry where like you've been successful, and you might have been successful for a long time.
That's a good point.
And you're changing because you want something else. You don't feel like whatever your reasons are. I think it would be hard. Like if I were to change careers right now and like essentially take a demotion and not be as good as at my new job as I was at my old job, I think that'd be really difficult for like my ego to take.
That's a major ego hit. Yeah.
It'd be really difficult for me to like stick with it through the difficult times when I'm like, man, am I doing like a lot of self-doubt, I guess, and asking my question if I'm really doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. So being prepared for that and to help people work through those feelings of like, yeah, like you were a highly successful professional, but it may take a little bit of time, months, a year and a half, whatever, to get to that level of where your expectations for yourself are.
Yeah. Well said.
I also think, there's a certain mystique or mythology about changing careers to become a teacher and the social impact that you imagine you're going to have.
You're going to mentor all these kids.
Yeah. And you know what? I am not sitting here dispelling that in any way, shape, or form, because it's true. I mean, it's a thing, that impact, but I would Elena, I might help them work through that the impact or how it unfolds may not be how they expect. And expectations can lead to disappointment, and you have to be in the moment and kind of accept things for how they are. Like you're saying, Mr. Crable, as you learn how to teach.
And Crable, I didn't even think about the fact that like they're in these mid-level positions perhaps, and they're coming in as a successful person elsewhere. And then that's a major ego hit to watch a lesson fail, like watch it go down the tubes. And you're like, that feeling where it's like, oh no, this is terrible.
This is bad.
This is bad. You realize it like the first 5 minutes. And then I was also thinking like, as a 22, 23-year-old first year teacher, I didn't have any kids. I didn't have any obligations. I could stay there. I can get there early. I can stay late. I can do all that stuff. Whereas maybe it's not as possible to. So being well planned and organized is going to be crucial.
Make no bones about it, though. When you have that awful lesson, it doesn't matter whether you're 22 or 42. It's the same feeling. Yep. It stinks.
Yep.
All right. Good job, Mr. Sids. Thank you, Elena, for the question. Moving on.
All right, Dr. Diz. This next one is for you. It's from Nanette in Arizona. She said that she got connected with us after our interview with Kathy Hoffman a while back. Dear Robbie, big fan of the pod. I know you've said that you've been a principal at all 3 levels of public education. What is the major difference between the levels, and what is the biggest similarity?
Oh, that's a hard one, Nanette. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the pod. We appreciate your fandom. Yes, all 3 had no such plan starting out. It just kind of has unfolded that way. And I should point out, Nanette, that I only knew one of them going in. So one out of the only one
33%.
Yeah, I was only prepared for a third of the principalships. I was not trained as a secondary educator. I think the primary difference is something that Peter referred to earlier, which is the closeness or lack thereof to the work. At the elementary level, I felt very connected to teaching and learning, to classroom planning, to kids in the classroom. Imagine, Nanette, that every summer, when I was an elementary school principal, we were still back in the days of what we called articulation cards, where in the spring, let's say the third grade teachers would take the articulation cards and create next year's fourth grade classes. Well, that summer, I would put all those classes out on the conference table in my conference room, and I would review them, let's say, and I would make my own changes as I saw fit. That's how hands-on I was. I knew the kids. I knew the teachers' personalities. I knew what parents wanted. I just should say we don't honor parent requests. But that's, I mean, that was how close to the work you can be as an elementary principal. You know, at the high school level, there's no such closeness. Now you can get to know kids, and you can certainly be as close to teaching and learning as you can find time to be. But it is really, you're much more of a sharer of information at the high school level. I get a tremendous amount of information from the organization itself and then from the school system. And my responsibility is to make sure that all that information gets to the right places. That's really what I spend most of my time doing. A lot of it is, I mean, information could be a proxy for politics. It's really political in a lot of ways. The middle school environment is kind of somewhere in between. It's, you know, it's just that in between. I would say another difference is at the high school level with over 200 staff members, you're not developing one team. I felt like when I got my whole elementary staff in the media center, we were a team, the whole staff. I could develop the staff as a team. At the high school level, the teams that I spend most of the time developing are my administrative team and my leadership team, because I've got to work through those folks. I could have a direct person-to-person impact. I'm pointing at Casey right now with a third grade teacher. I could go to third grade planning meetings and say, don't teach Sarah Plain and Tall or I'll fire you. That's the kind of influence I could have. The same, how they're the same. I would again go to my distinguished colleague, Mr. Krabs. It's a people business. You've got to know what makes people tick. You've got to understand their motivations, motivate them, give them feedback, incentivize what they do, all those things. That is the same across organizational types. I think the primary difference is, you know, sometimes at the secondary level, that impact that I have on teaching and learning, I just don't feel it as much as I used to at the elementary level. That was a very long answer.
Well said.
Well said. All right. This next one is for Mr. Krabs. It actually was addressed to all of us, but I'm going to direct it at Pete. This year and last year has been extra tough on teachers and students, and I'm thinking about finding a new career. I'm feeling burnt out from teaching. What should I do?
Yeah, it has been a challenging 2 years. There's no question about that. But, you know, I mean, for everybody and for this individual as well, I mean, you know, why did you get into teaching in the first place? Like, what drew you to it? Was it the kids? Was it the schedule? Was it the interactions? What was it? And hopefully for most people out there, it's because they like working with kids. Mm-hmm. And I think when I'm feeling stressed or burdened or burnt out or whatever, finding moments in the day where I can, I don't know, I can be a weirdo and with kids and joke around and have fun.
There was like a weird pause there too.
But we all know that it's true. It's true.
It is true.
Just be goofy.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just be lighthearted and fun and have a good time and, whatever. And it can be really challenging for teachers, I know, to do this. I think in the last 2 years, the biggest change from what I can tell is just more is asked of teachers in terms of academics and testing and social emotional and navigating friendships and adolescence and pubescence and hormones and a lot of stuff that it kind of like is always the job, but just feels like a lot coming back. So I think finding those reasons why you did and going back to them and giving yourself a break every once in a while too. This will shock Casey and Robbie, but not doing work at times, making sure that you have a life outside of school, because I think
I've learned from you from that. I've done a lot better.
And I think I will only speak for myself in this. I literally have no clue if this anybody else does this, but like part of the thing that really helps me is that even like if I'm in the midst of something work-wise, it kind of consumes your brain, right? And you're thinking about it and you go home and on the ride home and you're still thinking about it, and it's at dinner and you're still thinking about it. Having other things to think about, other hobbies, other interests, whatever those are for you. And then in the middle of the day, you're just like, yeah, let me think about that instead. It's almost like it gives your brain a break, and it gives yourself a break so that you're not just like perseverating and looping on the same things over and over again, which in my opinion leads to increased burnout because you have nothing else going on.
Yeah.
So I think it's, for me, it's just like finding other things that you can do as well, like still doing your work, still doing your job, but having it not consume you.
At the risk of offending our partner, Mr. Krabs, I'm going to say something just so terrible.
Oh no!
You referenced the word job, and a computer programmer can say to himself or herself, themselves, when they have a bad day, well, you know what? It's just a job. But for some reason, educators aren't allowed to say that.
Sure.
And I understand why, because we're dealing with people's kids and it's critical. But I would say there have been a lot of times in the principalship where I've had to say to myself, you know what? It's a job.
And you can't control everything.
Correct. You can, and it doesn't define who you are. It's a part of who you are. And I fall back on that one a lot because it just reduces the importance of it a little bit so you can, feel sane.
Yeah. Well said. I've learned a lot from you, Mr. Krabs, I must say.
Thanks.
All right. Dr. John, you want to read the last one?
Oh, am I up?
Yeah.
All right. You ready, Mr.
I'm ready.
Sids? All right. This next one is to you, C.H. Siddons. It's from, I don't want to mangle Niesa's name. I think it's Niesa in Wisconsin. Casey, I'm a teacher and department chair in Hennepin County, not too far from the folks you interviewed from Minnetonka back in season 1. Whoa.
Minnetonka.
That's a throwback.
She has been listening since season 1, and I'm looking to find out how to use my district's observation system to help my teachers. I know you've talked a lot on the pod about your experience with observations. What advice do you have to make observations actually have an impact on teachers? Great question.
That's a great question. I think one of the things I've figured out over the years is, like, obviously we do a lot of informals and formals. Like, that's the two major buckets. I always found as a teacher, the informal observations were always more helpful to me because it was like quick and I got the feedback back in my hands in a relatively short amount of time. And it was specifically tied to a specific lesson that I knew I needed to work on. So I think my belief personally is that informals can do a lot more good in terms of moving an individual teacher's practice. I think the formal observations are tricky because they're very technocratic. They're very, depending on what system you're using, they have to be by the book and they have to go by a specific procedure and things like that. However, I think if it's tied to like standards, if it's tied to something that's very clearly measurable in terms of like what a teacher does and its impact on kids, I go back to the quote that I stole from Kelly Phillips, our friend Kelly Phillips, being clear is kind. And if you are clear with people, and if you're straight up with people, and if you are, very clear and with your expectations and with the expectations of the observation and how folks are being measured and evaluated as we'll go back to that being a people business, like we're working with humans. I think if we're upfront with all that information, all that stuff ahead of time, being clear is kind. And when you talk to teachers about their practice even in a formal way, I always say, I'm stealing my own quote. I've developed it over the years. It's like every observation is like a piece of your teaching puzzle. Like it's a big jigsaw puzzle, and every single observation you do, informal or formal, is a piece of that puzzle. And it shouldn't define you, even if it doesn't look as good on paper necessarily. You have something to say, Crable.
Quoting yourself. Nice.
I did. I threw it out there, but I've been using it recently, and I feel like it explains it well for people, where it's like people get freaked out about one formal, and it's like, that's not, of course, a formal is important. And an observation sometimes gets people anxious, but every observation is just a piece of your teaching puzzle. It's just one lesson.
And I think that there's the one thing, and then Robbie, you can go, is like you can have the greatest feedback in the world, but if people don't hear you or can't hear what you're saying because of how you say it or for whatever other reason, it's useless.
Yeah.
So like for me, I tend, again, this will surprise you, I tend to go towards the critical by nature.
That's human. That's humans. Brains are designed to do that.
And it's more because, like, even for myself, I'm like, oh, I could do that better. I could do that better. I could do that better. And I just don't spend a lot of time on the, like, I guess sometimes you're like, that was so awesome. But one thing, I found is that for many people, not everyone, but for many people, and this is getting back to knowing who you're working with, giving them praise about what went well and everything, so that if you really want them to hear the feedback of what they need to work on, is that they're primed, and you prime their brain to be able to hear and listen. You haven't activated their amygdala so that they're like fight or flighting, and they can hear you. So I think that's just one thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, well said.
I would just add that, and I don't know, Casey may disagree with me on this, but it might just be 28 years of laziness. But I've also learned over the decades that you put something in writing and it triggers people. It either makes them feel like they're the greatest thing in the world, or they seize on the part that is constructive feedback or criticism. I think there's a place to have conversations about teaching without anything in writing.
Yeah.
I think most professional growth systems are writing documentation heavy. And some of the best, I think probably what I do best with teachers is talk to them about teaching.
Yeah.
And I think you can, to your point, Mr. Krabs, you can get at all of that other stuff that you can't control once you put word to paper.
Yep.
Because they're going to take from that paper whatever they want to take. But when you're in that dynamic of having a discussion, that to me is where the magic can happen in moving someone.
Can I also mention one thing that, Robbie, I feel like informs my view on how school leadership teams could run is 1 year we did like a 3-year run of like hyper focus on differentiating instruction, professional development. Like we went all out, if you recall. And then I don't know if
I don't recall. Yes, I do recall.
Well, I don't know if it was the first year or the second year, but there was a year that changed my view of formals where you expected every formal had to have one claim about differentiating, either in standard 1 or standard 2, one of the standards. And
Kelly and I are still fighting about what standard it falls under. But go ahead.
Well, that's the thing. It could land under a number of different standards. If you look at the National Board Professional Teaching Standards, like it could land on a number of different ones, right? But the point of it was that the thing that struck me so much was that, okay, we're developing people, we're supporting people as much as we possibly can with the people we have in this building to reach kids, and we're showing, like, in a lot of ways, the ways that it's positive in the formals that we're writing for teacher practices. And I thought it was a way to show that formal observations are not just a checklist of things. It's something that's informing our work. So,
yep, totally agree. All right. Thank you to our.
I have one more, Dr. Dodd.
You do.
I have one more.
Okay.
It was addressed to all of us, but I'm not going to answer it because I have no clue. It's another anonymous one. If someone gave you $500 tomorrow, what 2 teams are you going to put your money on who are making it to the Super Bowl this year?
Ooh, $500. What 2
Someone
teams?
just gave you $500 and you had to put your money down on these 2 teams making it to the Super Bowl.
I'm going Packers, Chiefs.
Ooh.
I'm picking chalk, kind of. That's kind of wimpy. What do you say, Mr. Graves? Pick something.
Yeah. I'll go Rams.
Oh, that's a good one.
And Patriots.
Whoa.
That's good. Rams, Patriots.
Yeah.
That's a repeat 3 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, it totally is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. All right. That's a good anonymous question. It makes me happy to throw some. I've always, you two know that I've always not so subtly tried to turn the education podcast into a sports podcast. That's really what I'd rather be talking about.
Just slowly moving into that direction.
So the next mailbag, send in the sports questions.
All right.
I'll answer them.
I'll add another category on the Google form.
Unrelated education questions.
Mr. Siddons, thank you for gathering the questions from our loyal listeners.
Yes.
I was so impressed that Niesa has been listening since season 1.
We got a lot of diehard listeners, I must say.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
I gotta say, I'd be down to do this again. I mean, we only got to, I think, a fraction of the questions, so
that's right.
We can.
Is that a show lie or is that true?
No. There's a bunch of them. Yeah.
Oh, are there?
I had to go through them.
All right. Yeah. All right. Well, then let's do it again because
were there like 40 or 50 questions, Casey?
Yeah, something like that. 40s.
Whoa.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm saying, man. So we only got to like 6.
Well, I mean, he didn't share them with us before the freaking mailbag show. So how am I?
Yeah, because I didn't think you needed them. I thought you all were professionals, but here we are.
All right.
I need prep time. They need to be multiple choice.
All right. The new year is approaching. We will be in 2022 by the time you hear this. I'm confident that both of you are going to be laying low on New Year's Eve and not
ragers,
not having a date with Omicron. If you can,
we will not be going anywhere.
All right, good.
I'll be watching Fish live webcast for free.
Oh, nice.
They're not. They canceled their New Year's Eve Madison Square Garden shows
for free. You squeaker, Mr. Siddons.
So I'll be checking that out on the YouTube.
Mr. Krabs, do the kids beat pots and pans out front? Do they go outside and do little pots and pans? That's what we used to do back then.
You think my kids stay up till midnight? And that would be a big no.
Really?
No
way. Okay.
No way.
All right.
It just, I mean, they would love to. It just the next day is just unbearable, really.
The pros don't outweigh the cons.
A lot of cons.
I think I remember staying up until midnight when I was probably 7 or 8. What about you, Mr. Sids?
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was allowed to until like maybe I was 10 or 11, I would think. I feel like I wasn't allowed to.
Robbie's from the latchkey generation. Okay.
That's true.
There were not many rules in the 70s at all. It was kind of like,
do the best you can.
It was
awesome.
free range child. Oh, it was fantastic. But Generation X is kind of compromised because of it. All right. As always, Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Pulp Education, a full-service educational media company specializing in leadership, instruction, and 21st century school reform. You can find us at Ed's Not Dead PC on Twitter, or check out the website, edsnotdead.com. Welcome to 2022, everyone. Spread the word about the pod and keep the questions coming for the next Mailbag episode. We really appreciate it. For Casey and Peter, fellas, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Take care.